Senate Veterans Committee Oversight hearing for the assessment and the support of incarcerated veterans. We are going to have members in and out today. Unfortunately, we've got many simultaneous committees going today, and two of our members actually, I think, are chairing other hearings. So Senator Roth and I are going to try to hold our own. We thank you very much for coming here today. I'm Senator Jim Nielsen, the chairman, and with us today is Senator Richard Roth, most esteemed member of this committee and the most experienced member, I'd say, in terms of our veterans issues. Just to start off with, I'd like to see if Mr. Pete Conity, is he out there? I guess he drifted off on me here.
He'll be back in a second.
All right, I'll catch him in just a minute. We established some priorities as a committee, and one of them is the incarcerated veterans. Over the last 2 years, we've wanted to spend time and attention examining some of the issues that were and are important to incarcerated veterans, to see what assistance they may require and what assistance is available to them, and what other things may be done for our incarcerated veterans. I don't know that I'd say necessarily it was to my surprise, but I actually found that quite a few things were being done out there by good people like many of you who are going to be on the panel here, and officials within CDCR and within our community, and some of the volunteers and private nonprofit organizations. And we're hoping that what this will do is highlight and expand these opportunities for our incarcerated veterans. We believe that there are too many sad things that happen to our veterans when they come home. And of the saddest was when they get on the wrong side of the criminal justice system. It's bad enough when they're homeless and shunned and don't get the healing opportunities that they require. But then when they get in trouble with the criminal justice system, then that hill becomes all the more difficult for them to climb. So today I'm hopeful that we can highlight some of this, get ourselves on the pathway to some answers. Beg my indulgence just a minute since Mr. Conity came back into the room. Pete, could you come forward just a second? Before we get into our most important subject matter, I'd like to acknowledge this fine man, Pete Conity. He is Mr. Veterans of California. And I'm privileged to announce that he's now been inducted into the Officers Candidate School Hall of Fame at Fort Benning, Georgia, Columbus, Georgia. Lieutenant Colonel Pete Conity, that is, and I won't necessarily read his biography, but not only does he have the Bronze Star, he has many, many others that he wears proudly, and many honors that this good man has achieved. Oak leaf clusters with that Bronze Star, and Pete always wears so proudly his Purple Heart. Daily he serves the veterans so very well, and it's an honor for us to acknowledge you, Lieutenant Colonel Conity, for your induction into the Hall of Fame. We're going to have a strategic overview by two very prominent officials, Secretary Scott Kernan He is the Secretary of the Corrections and Rehabilitation Agency and Secretary Vito Imbascanini of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Gentlemen, could you two come forward? We're honored to have you. We will then go into a second panel, the working group, and then hear the voices of the veterans thereafter. We will have the opportunity then for public comment and input. This proceeding will be recorded so people can have the opportunity to digest it more thoroughly as we proceed. One of the things that I, knowing the corrections as well as I do from my years as Chairman of the Board of Prison Terms, I wasn't surprised that the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation was doing as much as they were for our veterans, but it expanded the scope of even what I expected. So if we may, Secretary Kernan, could you give us your comments and thoughts about what's going on within corrections and rehabilitation for our veterans population?
Mr. Chair and members, thank you very much for having me. I'm going to keep my comments very brief and want to thank you for taking the time to discuss this very important topic of incarcerated veterans. During my years with CDCR, I've seen the power of concentrating programs and services to our incarcerated veterans, to the inmate, to the culture of the prison, and to the safety of the staff at our prisons. We have about 6,300 incarcerated veterans today in our prison system, another 500 more that are self-identified. You're going to hear from staff in the following panel about the work in the prisons from Dr. Johnson and Lieutenant De Rosa, who are doing some great work in this area. You're going to hear from staff about the programs and services both in the prison and how we can do a better job of transitioning incarcerated vets into the community. One of the primary themes for CDCR and the administration is to do a better job at rehabilitation while in our prisons. And I know you have many years working within the system. I am proud to say that I think that there's some innovative programs going throughout the system, including those focused on incarcerated veterans, more so than in days past. Another primary consideration for the department is to do a better job transitioning all offenders, including incarcerated veterans, into the community. We are at a cliff in the department, I believe, with the federal population cap that we have. As you might know, we're at have a population cap of 137.5. We are about 2,000 under that population cap. We have about 4,900 inmates out of state today that many would have us bring back. We have prisons, as that I know you well know, have well outlived their useful life. And so we have some difficult challenges ahead of us. There's no doubt in my mind that if we were to go over that cap because of those reasons, the compliance officer in the federal court letting inmates out early is bad public safety. So it is with that spirit that we try to partner with USVA and CalVet to bridge the services to this population as a critical element of CDCR's mission. I think I'd be remiss to say that one of the primary elements of the governor-sponsored initiatives will incentivize inmates to participate in productive rehabilitative programs and ready themselves for parole. I think those services are providing hope in our department, and they will help all of our incarcerated veterans as well. Inmates earning their way out and getting services to succeed is smart public safety. I look forward to the discussion, and again, thank you for your attention in this matter, and I really look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Thank you.
And we'll have some of your specific folks that do programs talk later then, Secretary Kernan. Also, now we have with us the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs Agency, Secretary Vito Imbasciani.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Nielsen, members of the Senate and Veterans Affairs Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today on a very important issue of concern to all of us, veterans incarcerated in our state prisons. CalVet's mission is to serve California's nearly 2 million veterans, including the more than 6,300 veterans incarcerated in California State Prison. you know that CalVet is not part of the criminal justice system. That means that our testimony today focuses only on what CalVet and our partners do to assist our veterans already in the justice system. And our partners in this effort include the County Veteran Service Officers, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, community organizations, and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. After my comments, more detailed information will be provided by one of our subject matter experts at CalVet. And on that next panel, you will hear Roberto Herrera, a special programs manager who works in our Veteran Services Division. So, Senators, there are two vital roles CalVet plays assisting our incarcerated veterans. The first role is to try to help veterans avoid jail or prison time by getting them into a diversion treatment program. This takes place in one of our Veterans Treatment Courts, or VTCs. We also work with the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training to provide a curriculum for police and sheriff deputies to better deal with veterans on their initial contact. This training helps them recognize veterans who may be dealing with PTSD or suffering from the effects of traumatic brain injury, TBI. Our second role is working to successfully return veteran inmates back to their home communities. The net result of both of these activities, we believe, is to reduce recidivism, to put more veterans back into communities where they can contribute positively to society, and to reduce the overall number of incarcerated veterans, thus saving taxpayer money. So let me begin with veteran inmates. When a veteran is convicted of a crime and sent to a state prison, he or she does not lose their status as a veteran. However, they do lose many of their federal benefits while incarcerated. For example, immediately upon incarceration, a veteran loses access to medical care provided by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs because the prison becomes the veteran's new health care provider. In another example of a lost benefit, an incarcerated veteran loses most of his or her VA disability compensation after 61 days of imprisonment. Now, most of our veterans in our state prisons are eventually released on parole and go back to their home counties, and everyone wants our veterans to succeed there and to avoid returning to prison. As I'm sure my colleague, Secretary Kernan from CDCR, can confirm, one of the greatest factors of recidivism for parolees is the lack of a support structure, housing, employment, health care services, and the like. But through our joint efforts, we provide part of that support. CalVet connects incarcerated veterans with information and services that assist them in achieving a successful parole and transition back home. Working with our CDCR partner and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, we have identified 6,330 veterans in our state prisons. Only 40% of these prisoners self-identify themselves as veterans. That means that 60% of the veterans in our state prisons are not getting any information about the services and options available to them while incarcerated or when they go out on parole. So armed with this new information, CalVet provided information about benefits and services starting in 2014 to more than 460 incarcerated veterans at 15 locations. CalVet staff has met with more than 20 veteran support groups in CDRC prisons. Our department sends information to all verified veterans in our state prisons who are within 180 days of their projected parole date. We provide them with information specifically tailored to their home county. This information identifies local service providers and gives contact information for CVSOs, local VA medical facilities, and much more. This effort reaches about 1,000 incarcerated veterans each year. This info, combined with a good parole plan, can improve the likelihood a veteran will succeed on parole, thus reducing recidivism. In practical terms, when CDCR staff or our CVSO meets with an incarcerated veteran shortly before parole, They work to complete the necessary VA paperwork that will allow the resumption of VA health care and disability compensation veteran benefits. This provides a vital economic safety net for these veterans. So while we've made great strides in the past couple of years working closely with our partners, significant challenges still remain. The main challenge is staffing. The federal VA employs only 2 staff persons in California who visit the 6,330 veterans in state prisons and the thousands of others in county jails. Similarly, my agency employs only 2 staff people for this veteran justice outreach. While most CVSOs reach out to veterans in county jails and state prisons, there is no requirement for them to do so. As a result, some don't perform that outreach because they don't have the staff to work with the general veteran population in their counties, let alone to work with inmates in prison. They simply do not have the resources or the time. Staffing challenge aside, CalVet intends to continue to reach out to our incarcerated veterans because it effectively improves their successful integration into their civilian communities. Let me describe the second role we play for our veterans involved with criminal justice. During the Vietnam War and continuing up to recent past, we did not do such a good job identifying those veterans returning home from military service who were suffering from mental health conditions, brain injuries, discrimination, or sexual assault. As a result, veterans diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury often did not receive adequate care, medical care, housing, or disability compensation for their military-related conditions. I'm pleased to report that is changing with the creation of 24 veteran treatment courts in California, and CalVet strongly supports the work of these VTCs. I know many of you are aware of these VTCs because many of you voted for legislation in the past that created them. The 24 counties with veteran treatment courts are home to nearly 3/4 of the state's veteran population. These courts provide veterans who committed a crime, typically a nonviolent property or substance abuse crime, with alternative treatment programs that divert a veteran from prison and into treatment programs. Today, instead of an endless cycle of incarceration and substance abuse, alcohol dependency, homelessness, and a lack of treatment, our veterans receive hope and the care they should have received earlier. With fewer recidivists to feed, house, and treat, the state and the counties both spend less money incarcerating veterans. A VTC involves more than just the judge and the veteran. In most cases, there's also a mentor present to guide the veteran through the process. This mentor will be a representative of the VA, there to arrange medical treatment, assistance with housing, guidance with disability and education benefits, and much more is needed. And all of this is provided under the watchful eye of a dedicated and experienced judge who in many cases is himself a veteran or herself. CalVet utilizes resources provided by Proposition 63, giving grants to CVSOs who seek out veterans in their own county jails that may be eligible for treatment court and other benefits and services. Since 2013, this program has resulted in helping more than 1,200 veterans in our county jails and state prisons. Rest assured, a veteran treatment court is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for a veteran. In order for the VTC process to be successful, veterans must complete all of the requirements set by the court, such as attending medical appointments and refraining from drugs and alcohol. After 1 year of demonstrating full compliance, a veteran graduates from the court in the presence of his peers, his family, and court officials. These county-level programs are effective tools that have a proven track record with a recidivism rate as low as 8% in some counties. In conclusion, I assure you that CalVet and our partners learned key lessons from how our society treated veterans in the past, and we are doing a much better job today. With CalVet's active participation with our partners, we are addressing both the front end and the back end of the justice system by assisting veterans in veteran treatment courts at the early stages of their involvement with the justice system and later at the end of a prison sentence. We are continuing our mission to ensure that veterans receive the benefits and services they need. All of this is done with a key eye toward justice, rehabilitation, reducing recidivism, and reducing prison costs. And our staff on the next panel are available to answer your questions. So thank you very much for this opportunity and for listening.
If I may, a couple of questions to start, and then Senator Roth as well. Secretary Turner, on entry, entering veteran, do they have any particular screening or diagnosis of any veterans-related conditions like post-traumatic stress syndrome as they enter in, or any particular attention that a veteran would get, or coding or acknowledgement of conditions of the veterans?
I would say the short answer to that is no, although I think Dr. Johnson in the next panel will be able to talk to you at some greater length. I think this has been one of the areas that needs some continued work. I don't believe until the offender is through the system and gets into a prison program like that of what Dr. Johnson runs, do we then try to address it. What I can tell you is that we are collecting data now and doing a much better job of trying to identify them within the system and when they come in.
In our previous conversations prior to this hearing, it was instructive to me, your vast experience in dealing with the prison system, that I wouldn't say that the veterans have a privileged status, but maybe should we say respected status on the yard, that they kind of gravitate to each other. They sort of have their own code, but the other groups, they respect those veterans in a little higher level than many. Is that a fair statement?
I think you'd be interested to find that even amongst our inmate population, there's a patriotism that exists. And so I think you're right that those inmates that have served our country do have a different status that sometimes transcends the jail politics. Yes, sir.
Well, you're getting a smile. Wade Teasdale, our very able consultant, put a question here for me to consider, and it's one that I can answer. The question was, does the Board of Parole hearings give any special consideration in their suitability hearings to veterans? And the answer to that is yes. In this regard, there are what are called factors in aggravation and factors in mitigation. Aggravation meaning that it makes you look a little worse in the eyes of the board as far as your risk of danger to society, and factors that make it look a little bit better. And the very factors that I just mentioned to you, that veterans experience, there are certain things in that the board commissioners become aware of that can be weighted as positive, particularly and most importantly if that inmate comments as such in the course of the hearing with insight about how their veterans experience, the code, the respect, or whatever they convey, demonstrates that they have an ability to abide by rules and codes and society's rules and insights about dangerousness. Many have commented about violence that they experienced in combat. And then when they show the emotion, as a commissioner learns to discern, you see how that affected them. And then in that you could get a little brief glimpse into the heart and the feeling of remorse that they felt when they were in that combat situation in the military, but then what that they subjected someone else to. So I can kind of answer that question, if you will, myself. Secretary Imbasciani, how could the legislature better be of assistance to your folks out there? We're always working with trying to help the veteran service offices with their resources. And you've given me some really encouraging news about how much outreach you're doing. Are there more things that we could do? I mean, we're always trying to help you financially, but What other kinds of things? Are there some volunteer resources that we could help direct your way, and partnerships with private nonprofits that could be encouraged through the legislators, at least moral suasion, if nothing else?
Right. Well, first of all, thanks to the legislature for the support you give all of the county veteran service officers. They don't belong to the CalVet; they belong to the individual counties. And as I mentioned, 24 counties have treatment courts, and the other counties. One of the reasons why they may not is that their CVSOs are stretched, as I mentioned in my testimony to you. They don't have the time or the resources. The fact that the federal system only has 2 people doing outreach in all of California with how many institutes?
35 prisons and 127,000 inmates.
QED. I don't need to say anything more than that. And my agency only has 2 people. So we can do a better job. I can look internally to see how we're using our resources and what else specifically we might need. I think the CVSOs are where they would need some more help, both either of a personnel or a financial nature. We're equipped, I think, to reach out on behalf of all of us in this room to the volunteers and the community-based groups to see if we can ask them to step up more.
Well, I think one area where Senator Roth and I would both recognize, because we here are a part of what realignment has become, and Secretary Kernan and I personally are very involved in that. And I think we would attest that a lot more needs to be done in terms of community rehabilitative opportunities, particularly related to mental health. And that's something that's always on my mind. And for our veterans, as well as many other offenders who return to society, that's one of our huge problems now that undergirds a lot of our homelessness. Certainly affects our veterans population when they come back into the community to have access to mental health rehabilitative resources. So just as a statement to you, something that I am aware of, I know my colleague, Senator Roth, is very aware of, is doing things to be enhancing resources for mental health assistance to all returning inmates and parolees into society, but surely as well for our veterans. Senator Roth, any questions?
Just a couple, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Gentlemen, I understand that when a veteran enters the CDCR system and becomes incarcerated, the veteran loses VA medical benefits. I assume that there's a certain percentage of our veteran population that is incarcerated that did not have VA medical benefits because they didn't sign up for them, even though they might be otherwise entitled to receive them. Do we know what that percentage is?
You're talking about once they parole?
No, I'm talking about when we identify individuals in our system as being veterans. I assume that some of those, if they don't want to tell us, they probably didn't go to the VA and sign up for VA medical benefits. Do we know what percentage of our veteran population that's currently incarcerated has not signed up for VA medical benefits, even though they would not be eligible to receive them during the time they're inside the wire?
So I don't know the answer, but I'm wondering if I'm going to be followed by Mr. Herrera, who may know that answer. Once again, we've only outreached to about 40% of the vets. A lot of them don't self-identify. That does not mean that all 40% have VA benefits, right, as we know that. You know better than most. So I don't know that number, but I'll bet it is known.
So my follow-up maybe is more of a statement than a question. I was going to make it a question. As they leave our system, what efforts do we make to ensure that those that are eligible enroll in the VA medical system so we can hopefully move folks from Medi-Cal, right, assuming they qualify, to the VA medical system where it's appropriate? And that may be other people too, but that's certainly a concern that I have, because that becomes an economic factor, as you know, for the state of California. And so I would be interested in that data, and then what the capture rate is. In other words, if we know what percentage of our veteran population inside the wire is otherwise eligible for VA medical benefits but is not signed up, even though they don't receive it when they're those benefits when they're incarcerated. Then we figure out what efforts we make to try to capture that population as we move that population from our prison system out into facilities, transitional or not, outside the wire, and then what the capture rate is, because I would think that the folks on the first floor would be interested in knowing that from a budgetary standpoint.
Your question is very germane. I know that we're doing a much better job of signing offenders up for Medi-Cal once they leave the prison system and go on to parole. I do not know the percentage of those, though, that are then placed on VA benefits, but I think that is something that we could get some numbers to.
Because it might be that those that are eligible for VA medical benefits would relieve some of our Medi-Cal cost as a state. So I think those are data points that I'd ask you to take a look at, and to the extent then that from a budgetary standpoint that either or both of your agencies need additional staffing dollars to make that piece of the operation work, we ought to work with the Department of Finance to work the numbers, because I suspect that adding a few bodies to your system to work those issues might be very beneficial to us from a budgetary standpoint.
Right, if I may, and we certainly haven't talked about this, maybe not a linchpin, but if we could broaden the catchment on entry when a veteran is coming into a prison, if there was some way to screen, just as we encourage doctors in emergency rooms, ask your patient, oh, did you ever serve in uniform? Are you a veteran? And to make sure that the people who work in the prisons have a broad enough definition of what a veteran is, not just to someone who is shot, for example.
Well, I mean, you have a medical screening when the prisoner enters the system, don't you?
Yes, sir. Is
that question asked?
I don't believe so, not in that direct context, but I agree with my colleague that that's something that we could do a much better job of self-identifying when they walk in the door.
And then, of course, once you ask the question and we gather the information, then we can determine, I guess the follow-up question is, are you signed up with the USDVA for medical benefits if you're otherwise eligible? And if the answer is no, then we can figure out how to put resources on that issue to have that individual sign up before the individual leaves your system, so that when they hit the transitional facility, if eligible, and if the condition is one that the VA would treat, we can get that condition treated at a USDVA facility and not through our California Medi-Cal program. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your help on that, gentlemen.
Gentlemen, we thank you very much. If you could hang around just a bit as we proceed, I'm sure we could have some maybe other insights. Our next panel would be a working group, and I'd like to bring them up there in groups of 4. The first 4 I'd ask to come forward would be Justice Eileen Moore, Danica Bojakovic, Eric DeRosa, and George Dixon.
Should we be seated, Senator?
Yes, please, just fill in those seats. And Justice Moore, we're going to allow just a little bit more time because of her prominent role with the Veterans Court. The others, we're going to try to hold it to 2 minutes or so, but I will be generous. We do have to be confined, of course, to the legislative schedules. Justice Moore, if you would proceed. Justice Moore is an Associate Justice with the California Court of Appeal of the 4th District.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for asking me to be here today. The American public blamed the changes and uncertainties during the Vietnam War on our soldiers. They came home to be spit upon in airports and to see bumper stickers reading such things as, "Want to take a voyage to far-off places, meet exotic people, and kill them?" How must our Vietnam vets feel when they go through airports today and see our current veterans being applauded and praised? While serving as a combat nurse in Vietnam at the 85th Evacuation Hospital in Quy Nhon, I realized that dying so far away from home was the biggest fear of our boys. The soldiers in Vietnam only wanted to cherish the America of their dreams. When they opened their eyes in the hospital, just a tent or a Quonset hut, to see an American nurse standing there, relief flooded their faces. Sometimes tears came to their eyes. All they knew was a part of America was next to them, beside them, taking care of them. When they were told they had lost an arm or a leg or an eye, their first words were usually about America, about their home. A typical response was, "Charlie can't get me now, I'm going home." One of the big lessons we learned from Vietnam was even if we hate a war, we can still love our warriors. The California legislature has done a tremendous amount to help our veterans. The statutes you have passed are sensitive to their needs and quite often creative. I am honored to be here today, and I am thrilled that you want to do more. I was appointed to the Superior Court by Governor George Deukmejian in 1989 and nominated for the Court of Appeal by Governor Gray Davis in 2000, where I presently sit. I was on the Judicial Council for 3 years and on the Executive Board for the California Judges Association for another 3. In 2009, the first Veterans Court in California began, and the judge who started it, Judge Wendy Lindley, knew that I was a Vietnam vet and asked me to gather up some veterans of Vietnam to act as mentors, and those mentors are still to this day the core group that work in what is now known as the Veterans Treatment Court. At the time, it was known as the Combat Veterans Court. Since that time, I have been going over there on Tuesday afternoons, and I act as a mentor myself, usually to women, but not always. Also in 2009, the Veterans Working Group for California Courts was launched. I have been its head ever since then. We try to make sure that the courts are ready, willing, and able to implement veteran legislation. When we see an obstacle to veterans in our courts, we try to take action. As a few examples, we authored the court forum MIL 100 to try to identify veterans who are in our courts. We watch over legislation concerning veterans. We prevailed upon the California Department of Justice to change their computer program to help process the sealing of records that the legislature ordered. I was asked to write the article by Vietnam Veterans of America in their national publication, VVA The Veteran, and I wrote it about veterans courts in 2010, and shortly thereafter I received some letters from some lifers at Soledad who are Vietnam veterans. I wrote back to them and I said something like, you are in a position to help other veterans who end up in prison. Fast forward 5 years and I heard again from one of those Vietnam veterans in Soledad, a lifer, and he said that they were actively involved in a veterans clinic serving all veterans in our California prisons, and that they began a group called IVVA, which means Incarcerated Vietnam Veterans of America. I was asked to come to the prison on Memorial Day to speak. It was nothing short of heartwarming during the flag ceremony to see these men in Soledad, these men who had served their country in Vietnam and who are now serving life in prison. Half of them raised their flag and their hand in a military salute, and the other half held their hands over their hearts as the flag passed by. That was the beginning of a group of volunteer lawyers who each volunteered to represent one Vietnam veteran as the man comes up for parole. Training was at the parole board facility last September 28th. I have a lot of observations about that training. I won't give them right now. When I became aware that doctors with CDCR and the VA had developed a way to test for PTSD resulting from military service, I tried to figure out how to implement Dr. Scott Johnson's idea of having veterans with PTSD return to court for resentencing. Accordingly, I wrote to Secretary Kernan. I have 2 other thoughts, which are fertile ground for this committee's consideration, which I have in writing. Briefly, one involves getting our aging Vietnam veterans into treatment with CalVet and perhaps even with the VA before they appear before the parole board. It's the treatment that everybody said so far they should have received decades ago. The idea would be, and from what I've learned from the working with the volunteer lawyers, is that the kind of things that these lifers need before they appear before parole board, it involves self-examination. That is, they have low self-esteem, impulsivity, selfishness, anger, violence, addictions to drugs and alcohol, callousness, immaturity, ego, pride, misplaced loyalty. And when I heard the secretary talking about that some people from CalVets do get into the prisons, it just seems like such a perfect opportunity to teach, to work. It doesn't really take lawyers working with these people to prepare them for the parole hearing so much as it takes somebody to sit down with them and then force them to look within themselves, perhaps read books, write book reports, doing a timeline of their life to explain why they enabled themselves to commit these crimes and take responsibility for them. Both the secretaries are here. These Vietnam vets are now in their late 60s and early 70s, and it's just a prime time. This committee could do something to get those Vietnam vets, to force them to, otherwise they're going to die in prison. I'll stop there, except I want to tell you the other thing that I am suggesting, and that is that there should be education for California lawyers about veterans, because I think it is sorely needed.
I'm familiar with some who maybe have been veterans who have taken an interest themselves kind of voluntarily, but you're suggesting maybe that some part of training in law school or sensitivity?
No, I'm not, Senator.
CE?
That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that somebody, it doesn't necessarily have to be a lawyer, and probably these dedicated people at CalVets are the perfect persons to go in and perhaps have classes or perhaps work one-on-one with these Vietnam vets, and that they have assumed this con mentality in order to survive in prison. And I'm sure you know, as soon as the parole board detects anything like that, they're considered a danger to society. But if somebody could sit down and actually work with them and get them out of their con mentality and into a human being mentality so that they can project themselves, there's a good person within them, and I believe that they still love the United States of America. I think they're genuinely good people, but thinking outside the box, so to speak, get them prepared for their parole hearings before they actually go, because they go to these parole hearings, they make mistakes, and something gets put in their jacket, and it follows them to their next parole hearing, et cetera.
You bet. Well, in part, some training to the attorneys that represent them in the proceedings, too, would be helpful, and I've got some thoughts on that, too. Thank you. We'll get back with you, too. Next, we would have Danica Bogetsevich, if I may. I'm sorry if I've pronounced that incorrectly.
That's okay. Thank you, Chairman and Senators. I appreciate the opportunity to be before you today. My name is Danica Bogetsevich. I'm the Network Homeless Coordinator for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs Network 21. I'm responsible for the coordination and oversight of all VA homeless programs across the 4 VA healthcare systems in Northern California, as well as 3 others in Nevada and the Pacific Islands. It's my pleasure to be here today to provide a brief overview of the VA Healthcare for Reentry Veterans Program in California. Several of the VA healthcare systems in California have been working directly with the criminal justice system for decades to assist veterans who are transitioning from jail or prison. In federal fiscal year 2006, VA Central Office in Washington, D.C. formally created a new program called Healthcare for Reentry Veterans. This reentry program aims to address the reentry needs of veterans incarcerated in both state and federal prisons. Reentry specialists provide outreach and pre-release assessments, referrals, and linkages to VA and community services, and short-term case management assistance upon release. In federal fiscal year 2009, VA developed the second part of our justice program, Veterans Justice Outreach, or VJO. Our VJO specialists work at the front end of the criminal justice system in the jails, treatment courts, and with law enforcement. And with all due respect to the previous panel, to correct the number of staff that we have in the state of California, we have 24 VJOs, federal VA employees who work in the front end of the justice system with the 24 treatment courts, the jails, and law enforcement. but my focus today is mainly on the reentry specialists who work with veterans incarcerated in CDCR. In California, we do have 2 full-time reentry specialists with the VA, as well as one who's located in Reno and has some responsibility for some prisons in the Sacramento area on the western side, as well as Nevada, so 2.5, so to say. We provide outreach and other services to veterans incarcerated in CDCR and federal prisons. These VA reentry specialists work with CDCR staff, the Transitional Case Management Program staff, Incarcerated Veterans Group, CalVet, County Veteran Service Officers, nonprofit partners, and other organizations, including some who are represented on the panel speaking today. While conducting outreach in CDCR, VA reentry specialists meet with incarcerated veterans who are preparing for reentry, but also with those who may have longer sentences, including lifers. They educate veterans about VA benefits, regulations that impact VA disability payments during incarceration, and how the VA reentry program may assist them with their transition from CDCR to the community. For those who are preparing for reentry, our reentry specialists conduct individual assessments and provide information and referral to VA and community programs for health, mental health, and substance abuse treatment, employment, housing, and other benefits. Veterans are provided with our guidebook for incarcerated veterans. I have a copy today and can certainly provide you with additional copies. It's a pretty big tome here. They're provided with copies of these guidebooks, which includes detailed information on a wide range of both VA and community resources, including federal and state benefits, information on all the county veteran service officers, locations of all VA hospitals and clinics in the state of California, including detailed information about the hours, locations, and services available through our VA homeless programs, where we have walk-in hours or drop-in clinics, where veterans can get direct referrals to shelters, housing, employment, and other services such as food banks, clothing banks, shower and laundry facilities. For those veterans who need a housing plan for their release, VA reentry specialists facilitate referrals and admission to VA residential treatment programs and to VA affiliated transitional housing programs. Our VA reentry specialists also work with CDCR's Transitional Case Management Program staff, or TCMP, to complete and process VA healthcare applications for those veterans who are preparing for reentry. Our reentry specialists help to expedite and track the progress of these applications and provide feedback to TCMP when the enrollment decisions have been made. This coordination allows incarcerated veterans to know in advance whether or not they qualify for the full array of VA healthcare services upon release, which helps them to plan for their treatment needs upon reentry to the community. In fiscal year 2013, the VA reentry program launched a new initiative called the Veterans Reentry Search Service, or VRSS. This program, which was piloted in California and 4 other states prior to the national launch, allows correctional systems to identify all veterans within their custody via comparison with the DoD list of all veterans who have served in the U.S. military, instead of just relying on self-report. On a monthly basis, CDCR is informed of veteran status for anyone in their custody, and VA reentry specialists are provided with even more detailed information on each incarcerated veteran that assists them with planning targeted outreach to prisons where veterans are preparing for release. The detailed information that we at the VA receive include such information as the name, full social security number, and date of birth, prisoner ID number, CDCR facility and cell location, parole release date, military discharge type, qualifying combat service, and military service-connected disability percentage for those who already have a disability rating through the VA. VRSS allows CDCR and the VA reentry specialists to make sure they know which inmates are veterans and to start the reentry planning process much more quickly. As stated earlier, the most recent VRSS reports show that there are over 6,300 incarcerated veterans in CDCR. Prior to using VRSS, many state prison systems did not track veteran status at all, and those that did could only do so based on inmate self-report, which tends to be underreported. Our own VA research shows that using VRSS allows for the correct identification of 2 to 3 times more veterans than are identified by self-report. So CDCR has been at the forefront of participating in VRSS to help identify veterans in their custody. In addition to our VA Healthcare for Reentry Veterans program, the US VA also has 2 other collaborative efforts with CDCR. One of these involves efforts to develop a process for conducting VA compensation and pension ratings exams for mental health disabilities by video teleconference for incarcerated veterans. This project is currently being developed between the Palo Alto Healthcare System and CTF Soledad. The other collaboration involves VA clinical staff providing training to CDCR clinicians on cognitive processing therapy. This is an evidence-based treatment intervention for those who have experienced trauma either in combat or non-combat situations. The VA provides a 3-day training, and CDCR staff participate in a minimum of 20 weekly case consultations by phone after the training is completed. Since the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs is prohibited by federal law from providing treatment to veterans while they're incarcerated, having CDCR staff trained in this treatment modality allows CDCR staff to provide trauma treatment to veterans while they are still incarcerated. To date, over 20 CDCR clinical staff have been trained in this program through the VA. The VA is dedicated to continuing our work with veterans incarcerated in CDCR and our continued collaboration with the many partners who assist with veteran reentry. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you today, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
Thank you. Mr. Eric DeRosa, Lieutenant, California Training Facility, Soledad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm the directing supervisor of a unique program at the Correctional Training Facility in Soledad, California. This program was developed by incarcerated veterans who wanted to do something for other veterans coming into the system. They've developed a veteran service office within the prison system, the only of its type in the nation. This is has never been done anywhere else except at Soledad. Since this office opened in 2005, they've assisted in the recovery of over $15 million of earned benefits by veterans, which goes to their families, and they receive a percentage while they're incarcerated. The services that they offer is a culmination of everything offered by CalVet VA. We've become essentially a resource center for incarcerated veterans. We've received correspondence from all of the CDCR facilities, with the addition of 24 outside of state facilities that have contacted us for assistance with VA issues and forms and whatnot, and information, if you will. The unique environment we're in a correctional facility took trial and error to develop this program suited for that environment, establishing aiding with the high rate of successful claim and positive claims after filing notice of disagreements with the VA, and claims follow-up with the Board of Veterans' Appeals in Washington, D.C. In court in the U.S. Court of Appeals, we've had much success in getting inmates their benefits before they parole, and we've assisted in transitional housing and medical and everything else that the VA has to offer. We've been able to connect those services for those inmates before they parole. We work very closely with the Marin County Office of Veterans Affairs, who assists with all of our claims. And that unique bond that we have with that office, I believe, is what makes the program very successful. I won't keep much of your time because I could rattle on and on about this. I would much rather answer questions that you may have for me. But it's a very unique program that I believe truly benefits our inmates. And the one statistic that I believe stands out apart from everything else is we have 523 inmates that we've assisted in successful parole, veteran inmates. And of those 523, only 3 have violated parole.
That's an incredible record, Lieutenant DeRosa. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
And I thank you and your warden or wardens who have allowed that program to proceed. That's quite a success and indeed a model. So. Yes, sir. Everyone has been extremely supportive, and we've been able to bring other folks into the program from outside facilities. We've had numerous seminars on post-traumatic stress disorder. We've had apprenticeship standards just came in and gave seminars for jobs for guys that are paroling. So it's been a cumulative effort that's, for me being here today, this is 10 years of hard work that's coming here today. It's well, great. We hope that you find it fruitful. May I acknowledge Senator Ben Allen has joined us here as well. Thank you, Senator Allen, for joining us. Mr. George Dixon is the Monterey County Veteran Service Officer. Mr. Dixon, thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen, for inviting me again. I think we started this conversation about 2 years back of what outstanding things that Soledad Prison's been doing. And I kind of added Salinas Valley State Prison, where when I became the CVSO for Monterey County, by going through the community resource manager and getting inside there and working with Dr. Johnson and the VA and the Veterans Transitional Center and all of our community partners, we can't do it alone. And as stated before, it takes a unique type of person to go in and work with these special populations of veterans. Things I want to cover a little bit of from what I observed the past 2 years of going into correctional facilities, besides working with the larger facilities or county jails, Los Angeles County Jail, and our local county jails prior to coming to Monterey. Things that we do well together, we collaborate, we communicate, we correspond to the veterans that are inside, and we don't treat them as such to show them, well, you're incarcerated and you're here because you're here for a reason. 98% of those individuals know that they need to be there. And my first experience going into Soledad and Salinas Valley, when I went to the large veterans group of about 36 veterans from all eras, I told them, you know, when we come in, if you're here for the lifetime extent, we can help you. If you're here for 5 to 10, we can help you. If you're transitioning home, we can help you. This is your house, and you're inviting us into your home. You're a pillar of your community. If you want to help each other, we're here to help you. By treating them with that respect and dignity that they deserve, these individuals started coming out of the woodworks, as Dr. Johnson will probably state when he comes up and talk about how more veterans in Salinas Valley want to participate in our programs. Things that we do well, we train 7 inmates at Salinas Valley Prison to work on basic VA benefits. What that does is we took our state veterans manual, gave an overview on veterans benefits. They took a small exam that we gave them. Average test score was about 92. And these are 7 individuals in a level 4 facility that took the time to take the class with us. So they're able to advocate for themselves on 1 yard at this time. And we're talking about expanding it to the other yards. Soledad Prison program continues to excel in what they're doing. It's an excellent, those 2 individuals that work that program in Soledad do an excellent job in working with the incarcerated veterans and collaborating with our office, because the office was established about 10 years back or 11 years back by my predecessor, Mr. Richard Garza, who really believed in working with this special population of veterans is very important to our community, because eventually, I tell my veterans reps, these people will be in your office sitting in front of you after doing 30, 40 years inside the state penal institution. And you have to treat them with respect. Things that we don't do so well. In the part of compensation and pension examinations, we do the psych evaluations, and Salinas Valley is part of one of the experimental sites that Dr. Johnson's working with. But we have an issue with the physical examinations. So a lot of the veterans' compensation and pension claims are disallowed because the physical exams cannot be completed. And this may be due to a partnership or lack of a partnership between CDC and the Department of Veterans Affairs, where they would transport a veteran for that physical exam, and then it's done and over with, where that veteran may have that option of winning that claim. The little 10% or the amount of compensation that they receive inside may be that sole surviving amount that they may have inside that facility, and may be a calming tool for the correctional officers that work with these individuals. And it's a little frustrating that when we get a denial letter back, it's sent up to my office, we look at it, and there's issues with the 2 agencies not collaborating. Things that we can do better: collaboration with state and federal agencies. County Veteran Service Officers, I'm unique, like the Secretary stated. We are very short-staffed. I'm a Director of Veteran Services for San Benito and Monterey County. I go into the correctional facilities along with my senior veterans reps, and that's generally, if I can, on a weekly basis. But when I do testimony and I travel outside, I also work the 2 military installations in my catchment area, which are Fort Honolulu, and we're partnering Camp Roberts. It's kind of hard to get in and out of the facilities. So we can't do it alone. It takes a team and a partnership to do these jobs to help this special population of veterans.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Ryan Hoffman, Veterans Transition Center, Monterey.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here today. As the panel knows, and the committee has said, I work for the Veterans Transition Center of Monterey County. I'm accompanied here today by VTC's Director, Colonel Terry Baer, and U.S. Army veteran Dan Scott, who is currently in our program. VTC is a 501c3 nonprofit that has been providing long-term transitional housing for homeless veterans since 1998. The VTC also provides a wide array of supportive services, including food, clothing, job assistance, and housing rental assistance. Annually, we provide support to over 1,200 veterans, and we find housing and employment for up to 200. My position at VTC includes case management, life skills coordinator, and outreach specialist. As part of my outreach duties, I make contact with veterans involved in the justice system in Monterey County Jail, with veterans under supervision with Monterey County Adult Probation, and veterans inside California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. VTC also works with the VA's Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist Program to help provide services for homeless veterans coming out of Veterans Treatment Court in Monterey and Santa Cruz counties. VTC started conducting outreach within CDCR in 2013 with California Training Facility, Soledad, and San Quentin State Prison. All these initiatives are currently unfunded but are incredibly effective and vital for our veterans looking to come home after serving indeterminate sentences. VTC today has provided services to 17 incarcerated veterans and conducted outreach with around 140. We have connected them with transitional housing, employment services, and rental assistance. VTC has successfully assisted 3 of these 17 veterans through the rehabilitation reintegration process. We currently have 14 veterans still in our Coming Home program. It has been my experience when our veterans come out from decades of incarceration, they face many challenges. Some of these include adjustment disorders, social deficits, lack of income, lack of positive housing options, and successful rehabilitation for these veterans takes intensive case management and well-established resources. We are excited at VTC to provide hope and new opportunities for our veterans and hope to be able to continue to bridge the gap between reentry and self-reliance. Thank you.
I thank several of you for making note of the distinction. Some inmates are indeterminately sentenced and they tend to serve quite a few years before they may be released. Others are determinately sentenced and tend to serve a lot less time. So there's a kind of a different class, and that's somewhat how they are treated and how they much time it takes them to be able to internalize and learn the lessons of time to rehabilitate. We'll get into that in a little bit. If we could now have some of you move around this side of the table so we can bring some more people up. Oh, do you want to ask a question?
We have some questions.
Of course, yes. We're going to do some more questions, but Senator Roth would like to ask some questions. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a fan of the VA medical system. I have to say that, full disclosure. It saved my brother-in-law's life and gave him 5 extra years that we didn't think we were going to have. And so that's in part the interest, that's part the motivator for some of my questions about the VA medical enrollment rates, because I think the VA medical system, frankly, is the best place to treat veterans' medical conditions of whatever type or nature. So I guess this goes to USDVA. Given the fact that we now have data and you can match up DOD data with CDCR data, do you have, and there should not be any undisclosed veterans in the system at this point, what is our capture rate in terms of the enrollment of those individuals who would otherwise qualify for VA medical services in the VA medical system, either during the time they're inside the wire or as they move out to transitional and supportive housing and beyond?
That's an excellent question, Senator. I don't know that I have the answer for that. I can tell you that on the VA side, we use the VRSS information to target where we're going to do our outreach and know how often we may need to go to a facility and make sure we're not missing anyone. And granted, we do only have the 2 full-time and the 1 part-time, and I agree that that's not enough. I don't know whether or not TCMP staff actually use that VRSS database to capture the enrollment paperwork, or whether they just ask for self-report when they're preparing for planning reentry services with them.
How do we get a handle on this? I mean, I realize that USDVA, you have more than enough on your plate. In fact, you have 5 or 10 plates on the table at any one time. But I'd like to know, and I do have some questions for you, Mr. Dixon, as well, so you may want to run. But how do we get a handle on this, and how do we, either as a state, provide appropriate funding for personnel to work this issue so that when an individual moves from one of our CDCR facilities outside the wire, that to the extent that individual is capable, is qualified to be enrolled in the VA medical system by reason of disability, that person is so enrolled and doesn't slip through the cracks, because that's what I'm concerned about. When you have two governments moving side by side, then there is at least some possibility, if not a likelihood, that folks are going to drop through the crack. And that's what I don't want to see. We're dealing with a vulnerable population that has some disadvantages that they have to work through anyway. If they have medical problems, physical or mental, on top of that, sufficient to qualify them as being disabled from the VA standpoint, then we need to make every effort as a state, certainly, to capture those folks and make sure that they receive the treatment that they richly deserve. So I guess I'm looking to you, USDVA, just as I'm looking to your state partners, to come up with a solution. And if it requires funding, state funding, well, it wouldn't be the first time that we helped, that we step up to the plate as a state and we do the right thing here. So.
Well, I'm sure our reentry specialists would agree with me that additional county veteran service officers who could come into the prisons to help with the claims, because that's something that even if we were to hire additional VA reentry specialists, that's not something, that's not a role that we typically do. We are there to provide consultation and assessments for VA healthcare services, but we don't actually file the claim process. So in terms of getting access to disability and other benefits, more county veteran service officers who can go into prisons would be helpful. As I said earlier, I don't really know how CDCR is using the VRSS report. They do get the VRSS report that lets them know who is a veteran, and so.
We have the data.
You have the data in terms of knowing that they're a veteran. It doesn't necessarily let you know whether they're already getting a disability or they're already connected with VA healthcare. But if you were to use that data, for example, to give it to the TCMP staff instead of asking for veterans to self-report, which we already know underrepresents when they self-report, then they could be using that to make sure that every veteran who walks through their door is provided with the application paperwork for VA healthcare in advance of their release. And again, our reentry specialists are there to help guide that process and monitor it and provide feedback as quickly as possible.
So then I guess from my personal perspective, I'll be looking to our state secretaries to come up with some information as to what they do presently, what they could do, what more they could do, and what the metrics are, what the goals and objectives and outcomes should be from this process. Because they have the data from you, we just have to use it to make sure we use it efficiently and effectively to capture the folks that need to be captured and make sure they're in the system.
And I'd be happy to go back to my leadership to find out if they know whether or not, by looking at VRSS, whether or not they also can cross-check it to our healthcare system to see who's already enrolled. At the moment, that's not the intent or the way that it's being used. It's just meant to help as an engagement tool and identify for outreach benefits. But I'm certainly happy to go back and see if it could be.
Well, with the chairman's permission, and we'll see what, I'll have an opportunity to weigh in, I'm sure. Perhaps we can get some information from both the CDCR and our state DVA on this issue and to enlighten us.
I have more questions for them, too.
And Mr. Dixon, just one follow-up, Mr. Chair, from Mr. Dixon. You referenced a problem with physical exams, which lead to disability ratings, as I understand it, with the VA. So it would be very helpful if, when we have veterans in our system who have physical or mental problems, to get that all sorted out so that when they move through the pipeline outside the wire to transitional facilities or beyond, that we have this disability rating thing fixed or sorted out. Because it's my understanding that if we don't, it takes a while for that process to occur.
Well, sir, my experience of going inside, once we initiate an action, claim side of it, we do it all wirelessly. A lot of them are receiving treatment inside the facility, but our obstacle is, although they're receiving treatment inside the facility, some of the physical disabilities, such as, say, for instance, if I have a knee impingement and I need an exam to determine the level of that disability, whether it's going to be increased or not, trying to get the problem fixed for a lifer who's never going to get outside the wire is an issue. So that gap in service is a hard one.
Well, that's on us, but I mean, what about the person that's in there for 10 years?
So the 10-year person...
And is identified as a veteran who would otherwise qualify for VA medical benefits but for the incarceration. I assume we can start the paperwork. Can you then obtain a physical and get a disability rating before the individual is released so that when they are in fact released, they could move right into the VA medical system and begin receiving the benefits that they deserve?
No, sir. The comp and pen for the physical parts is not, they're not allowed to go outside to do the comp and pen because CDC won't transport or there's no partnership, and the VA is not authorized to go into the correctional facility to give that person that compensation and pension exam.
So is the problem, it's not that the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs won't do the physical, it's that we won't transport the individual to the VA medical facility for the physical exam.
Yes, sir.
So it's a state issue. Okay, so we need to look at that too.
But on the VA side, they are doing the mental health exams via teleconference at Salinas Valley and Soledad Prison. So that obstacle has been overcome.
Thank you. We'll need to look at the physical piece, the physical exam piece of it as well at some point.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If we could have some of you move around now and we get our other witnesses to come up. Justice Moore, we'd like you to stay out there too, but the others move around. We have Mary Donovan, Roberto Herrera, and Scott Johnson.
Senator, I have some written testimony. To whom should I give it?
This gentleman, right there, the sergeant behind you there, Justice Moore. And if the secretaries could hang around, we'll have kind of all of you together for some final maybe questions from the members. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, Mary Donovan is the executive director of the Veterans Healing Veterans from the Inside Out. I'm familiar with her program, and it's an exemplary program. Ms. Donovan?
Thank you, Senator Nielsen, and thank you, members of the committee. I'm honored to be here. It's a wonderful opportunity. Veterans Healing Veterans from the Inside Out is a trauma recovery program for veterans incarcerated at San Quentin, founded in 2012 by a Marine serving a life sentence. He had benefited from programs designed to foster insight and self-regulation, but he felt even in those settings that he couldn't fully share the harrowing details of his combat experience. So he brought together a group of veterans to write and share personal stories of military and life trauma. And this practice proved very fruitful. We call it narrative therapy. It's simple but not always easy. Members write on prompts that explore ramifications of past trauma, and then they challenge and support each other in a process of developing insight into the circumstances and choices that brought them to prison. And they challenge each other very rigorously and with a lot of compassion, too. Since that time, the program has grown to meet a substantial need. We now have 4 narrative therapy peer support groups running at San Quentin, along with trainings in group facilitation and one-on-one mentorship. And we partner with aligned organizations to offer yoga, mindfulness, and theater practice. We've served around 100 veterans at San Quentin, and we're now expanding to a second prison, Duell Vocational Institution in Tracy. There's no one road from the military to prison for those who make that journey. But among our members, certain themes emerge. Early life trauma is rife. Many entered the service to escape dysfunctional and or disenfranchised backgrounds. Combat, military sexual trauma, and other experiences of humiliation and harassment suffered during service. And I certainly want to point out, I know this does not describe every military person's experience, but we are dealing with a lot of the people who did have those experiences. These experiences may compound that initial trauma. Self-medication and addiction followed for some. For others, the skills and adaptations that made them lethal and efficient warriors left them ill-equipped to function in the civilian world. But their military service also imbued these men, and one day I'll be able to say men and women, we've only been in male facilities so far, with an extraordinary passion and commitment to serving, even saving, their fellow veterans. This is illustrated by a quote, which I'll close with, from one of our members. And he says, Veterans Healing Veterans has instilled within me a compelling desire to work with others to help them find the inner peace and restored spiritual fortitude that I've been able to find in this family of vets. The trauma that I experienced in the military may always be a part of me, but it's the Veterans Healing Veterans philosophy that defines me now. I talk openly about this now because of the work I've been able to do in this program, and I'll help to save the lives of other vets as VHV has saved mine.
Thank you, Ms. Donovan. Dr. Scott Johnson, Salinas Valley State Prison.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me today. My name is Dr. Scott Johnson. I'm a veteran, a psychologist. I have 8 years of experience working with the Department of Corrections and also in serving incarcerated veterans. We currently provide treatment of PTSD by clinicians who have been trained by the VA. We liaise with the VSO, CalVet, and VA. We provide staff outreaches. We have a high staff population that have served both peacetime and in combat. We have implemented a pilot SPCA rescue rehabilitation program teaching skills through the service of others. And following Lieutenant DeRosa's lead, we have started a fledgling VSO project at Salinas Valley, veterans serving veterans. Some of the things that we are seeking to do, we are very close to implementing a service canine training program because for many of our veterans, they feel undeserving and many of them feel that they don't need help or just feeling beyond redemption. But yet they still feel the urgent need to help other veterans, especially disabled veterans, and to help prevent incarceration in the first place. And this is healing our veterans through the service to other veterans. We are exploring on how to provide an alternative enhanced outpatient program for our veterans, because many of our veterans need more than typical mental health, yet our EOP program is for individuals who suffer such diagnoses as schizophrenia. So as this is an excellent program but not designed for our veterans, many of our veterans get into this program and become more stuck. So we are exploring that. We are seeking a recognition of the post-traumatic stress disorder under the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 within our prison system. And lastly, we are seeking to establish a first Californian veteran honor block as a way of providing better services for our veterans. This is already successful in 25 jails and 36 prisons across the nation. These provide peer support, reminders of who they are, and also has a concentration of for the provision of veteran-related services for both on-site and for our volunteers. And with this, to create a devoted department to serve our veterans on-site as the more that we can coordinate all veteran services, we can do more with what we have, as well as trying to expand when we can. So thank you for allowing me to speak on this today, and this is what we are doing and what we hope to seek to explore in the near future.
The honor block, is that a lower level of security or just extra services?
It is a concentration of veterans, because as of right now, we have veterans scattered across the Institute, which multiplies the amount of time that it takes to serve them. So concentrating them allows better provision, it allows peer support. And many of our veterans, one of the ways to help identify veterans and to serve veterans is our veterans want to help each other. So that would be a way to make so much of what we have go so much further.
Peer support, I get it, okay. And Mr. Herrera, please.
So thank you very much, Senator Nielsen, members of the committee. In late 2014, CDCR and CalVet formulated an interagency agreement that provides our departments to have greater access and visibility to veterans incarcerated in our state prisons. Through this effort, policies have been developed to assist veteran inmates in pursuing benefits and services they may have earned through their military service. To enhance outreach to incarcerated veterans, CalVet has maintained a goal to develop an outreach model that will educate all incarcerated veterans on the benefits and services available to them, while attempting to create a best practice delivery apparatus that could be replicated across all prisons and jails. Along with regular scheduled visits to various veteran support groups in prisons, and collaborating with CDCR's community resource managers. CalVet continues to work on providing benefits information to each CDCR facility through their institution's libraries, physical mail systems, to each inmate that has been identified as a veteran. I want to highlight that CalVet continually explores ways to streamline the identification of and outreach to all veterans who are justice involved at both the state and local level. Given the existence of provisions within the penal code that allow for the divergent options like veteran treatment courts for veterans suffering from invisible wounds, the importance for swift confirmation of veteran status cannot be overstated. Although CDCR has taken the lead on system-wide identification by working very closely with the USDVA, efforts as efficient and reliable as CDCR's are only occurring in 4 of California's 58 county jail systems. Given that within CDCR facilities, as mentioned earlier, 60% of veteran inmates never self-identified, and that statistic is actually higher for female veterans who are incarcerated. The USDVA, CalVet, county veteran service officers, local sheriffs, and the county courts must continue to work together to ensure that veterans who are awaiting arraignment and those who have been convicted are identified early and efficiently in order to allow for the possible use of veteran-specific diversion and or mitigation offered through statute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Justice Moore, do you have some women who have come through the veterans courts? Do you?
Yes. I would say that when I was just listening to Mr. Herrera, it brought to mind the fact that I would say somewhere between 90 and 95% of the women I have mentored have been suffering from military sexual trauma. And after the experiences that I had in Vietnam, knowing that they're still going on, I strongly believe that this MST is entrenched within the military culture, and I don't want you to forget the women who are suffering from this. However, men are suffering from it too. One of the men that I mentored, a big, strong, strapping Marine, married, heterosexual, and he was gang raped by others. So this is a problem, and it's one of the reasons that I am recommending that the state bar receive some education, because I think it's a huge problem, and it's a huge problem for women especially because of the high numbers of them who are victims of this. I even had one young woman who, because she was ordered into counseling, VA counseling with men, she preferred to go to jail, to a woman's jail, rather than have anything to do with military men. So I just think it's a problem, and I hope the committee keeps that in mind.
Well, it's an ongoing, another priority, issues unique to female veterans. So we're always interested in input that you can yield to us in that regard. We have one more panel to proceed, but before we do, though, Senator Roth, some more questions, and then Senator Allen.
Mr. Herrera, I'm just trying to get an idea of why we still have difficulty identifying who is a veteran in our system, given the fact that apparently, I mean, it's the electronic age, and the Department of Defense certainly has records that at least, given privacy interests, whether somebody was in the service or not is probably not something that, you know, needs a high level of privacy protection. Given the fact that some veterans, that's my understanding, don't believe they're veterans unless they've served in combat, which we know not to be the case. So is there a list, a computerized list that exists out there that CalVet can take a look at, or county sheriffs can take a look at, the folks that run our county jails, to determine, run the names and match up and determine who in the system is a vet and who is not a vet, and then we can figure out what we do with that once we do that? Is that a clear question?
Yes, it is. I would start by saying for Well, let me describe CDCR's program just for a second and how they integrate with the USDVA to identify the veterans that are within their facilities. Basically, the database that CDCR uses, their inmate database, they send what is essentially an Excel spreadsheet to the VA through a web portal that only requires 5 fields of information: first, last, social. I believe prisoner ID is also in there. Nothing that isn't readily available. The turnaround time for the ID on veterans, from my understanding, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, but it's relatively quick. I would even say as short as a week. The CDCR gets that information. They know who their vets are. They send that information to CalVet, as well as information is shared with the homeless program with USDVA. So when you ask how can these other entities identify their veterans, personally, the simplest way, I think, would be for them to interface more directly with USDVA and engage VRSS across county jail systems and within the courts. And my understanding is that VRSS is open to all organizations that are within the justice system.
So we must have 100% identification rate by the time folks leave our CDCR system. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good from what I understand from dealing with the data folks at CDCR. Errors will come back regarding whether the inmate provided an accurate name or an accurate social. But so long as the inmate has provided the necessary information, which is first, last, date of birth, things like that, my understanding is that it's very accurate at determining whether or not they are a veteran. So in terms of figuring out what our issue is, the issue is not, for the most part, identification. The issue is what we do with the identifying data once we have it, and how many of those folks that we've identified we touch before they move out of the system. So I would, to address the other part of your question, I would say it's also implementation at the local level to get our partners, CVSOs, county courts, to implement this information sharing system so that they know who their vets are. In the jail system. In the jail system, because there is the MIL 100 form, which Justice Moore had indicated, but even that form is predicated on self-identification, which we know is essentially, veterans are known to underreport that status. This VRSS is not dependent on self-ID. It's dependent on the veteran giving the accurate information as to who they are.
You have something to add, Mr. Dixon?
Yes, sir, Senator Roth. Keep in mind that the Department of Veterans Affairs, we get it on the claims side of it. The only way that data system is going to be accurate is if that veteran ever engaged with the Department of Veterans Affairs. That means educational benefits, home loan benefits, compensation and pension benefits, or an inquiry. So if a veteran comes in and gets incarcerated, and they have not ever went to the VA for health care or any of those benefits, they will not come up in the Department of Veterans Affairs system. They will come up in the Department of Defense database system if they've ever served, and that's another database system that would have to probably have a partnership with. And also look at your selective guardsmen and women in reserves who don't consider themselves veterans but incurred an injury in service that may be eligible that don't identify. So,
which is why I want to try to make the connection between the identification in CDCR and the benefit enrollment, if entitled, through the VA system. So.
If I may, just to elaborate a little bit more on the VRSS. So as was stated, the correctional institutions, first of all, it's open to any correctional institution VRSS who wants to participate in it. As I said earlier, CDCR was one of the first ones to implement it, even piloted it. In the very beginning, there were a lot of glitches. For example, dependents of those who were in the military were showing up on that list. So if somebody was incarcerated, they themselves had never served, but maybe their father or mother had served, they were showing up on the list. But that's why we piloted in the 5 states, and California was one of the ones that did that. So as of today, CDCR uploads their entire inmate list through an Excel database to this secure portal that is VRSS. And that's where then the information, and I'm not sure that it's even a week, it may be a week, but I believe it's even less than that. The information is then sent back to CDCR in terms of just saying yes or no veteran status. So getting back your list of inmates, yes or no, they're a veteran. And then the more detailed information, protected information, goes to the VA staff indicating military history, branch of service, their discharge type, whether or not they're combat veterans, and whether or not they already have a service-connected disability. And this is using DOD information, so it's not just if they've used VA before. So it should be a pretty accurate. Obviously, the frequency is something that the correctional systems may determine on their own how often they want to do it. So in a state prison system, I think monthly is pretty standard nationwide, and that's what CDCR is doing. Within the jail systems, obviously, because of the rapid turnaround of some inmates who may be there for even less than 24 hours, you're not going to catch everyone. But we do have some city or county jails that are actually doing it weekly. I believe San Francisco is doing it weekly. Some are only doing it monthly, and so you're obviously missing folks. And then, of course, we have many that aren't doing it at all who aren't participating. But the VA is ready, and we provide training to the IT folks and the leadership of the correctional institutions if they're interested in participating in that to help identify, because self-identification, even with a great form like the MIL 100 form, is going to underrepresent folks because of misinterpretations of what a veteran means and, of course, stigma and shame for someone who may not want to identify.
And again, the question then is what we do with the data once you provide it to us. So, but thank you for doing what you do, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.
Mr. Chairman,
please.
May I say two things?
Justice Moore.
When the Veterans Working Group developed MIL 100, the Judicial Council form, Judicial Council forms are passed for approved or optional use or mandatory use. We recommended it to be mandatory use so that from that point on we would know who the veterans were who came into the courts, but the Judicial Council only approved it for optional use. So if the legislature wanted something different, the legislature could take some action, but we did try to get it for mandatory use to prevent this identification problem in the future. The second thing I wanted to say is when Dr. Johnson was talking about how they have developed a reliable technique for finding out whether or not our inmates have PTSD as a result of military service, that you passed a statute that went into effect 16 months ago. It's Penal Code Section 1170.91. And 1170.91 says that the sentencing court shall consider military service as a mitigating factor, or words to that effect, when sentencing. Most of our inmates who are in court have not had the advantage of that statute because statutes run prospectively rather than retrospectively. And it's just some food for thought for you with regard to this project that Dr. Johnson has.
Thank you for the reminder. Yeah. Okay. With the question. We have one more panel. If we could have now Mr. Sean Stevens, and Mr. Stevens has a guest or two to join us, I believe. Yeah, please. Yes, panel two. Thank you very much for being up here with us today. Oh, did you have something you wanted to add, Mr. Hoffman? I'm sorry.
Yeah, if I may, from the point of the service provider's perspective here, I mean, the VA and county affairs and Veterans Treatment Court do such a great job at getting our veterans out of prison. But when it comes to providing services for them, it's really important that we remember the nonprofits, the transitional housing services that are here, that are paramount in making sure that they're successful. For the VTC, we pick up our veterans straight from incarceration, and it is a all-day affair, all-week affair. You know, we plan their meetings with the vet reps. I have meetings with the county already set, and we take them from parole to clothing to food to reintegration. And this is a really big project, and it really takes a collaboration of the VA and county resources. And for us, you know, and I'm assuming every other nonprofit out here, we need those resources, we need those housing options, and particularly transitional housing options. Reentry for our veterans and for ourselves, yes, it is an option, but reentry is very close to incarceration. And transitional is statistically proven to be more successful to rehousing our veterans permanently and getting them reintegrated. Thank you.
It's an important point. And to panel two, I want to thank you as you're all here. I'll have some closing remarks, and Senator Roth will as well. But while you're still here at the table, I want you to know that this is not an ending. This is a beginning. And we are going to entreat you to continue to be in communication with us. We will likely have other hearings prospectively. But if you have written communications or other things you want to let us know verbally, communicate through the committee staff or directly to myself or the senators on our committee, we welcome that. We purposely made this a pretty bold agenda today with a lot of things packed in. We wanted to really cover a lot of bases. I think we have, and I don't think we've been hasty in doing it. We hope that you feel that you've had ample time to say what you needed to say with us, but it's an open invitation. So this is not the last that you'll hear of us, and we surely hope not the last that we'll hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Come on forward. Yes.
Can I stay?
Yeah, we're done. No, Justice Moore, did you have another thing you wanted to add? I'm sorry.
No, Senator.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, you could step down then if you like. Oh, Justice Moore, you don't need to stay up if you don't want to then.
Oh, I'm fine.
Okay, you're welcome to stay, please. Mr. Stevens, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Nelson. We actually met last time I was here, I think it was a couple years ago, and I want to thank all of you for having me again.
We started a good conversation back then, too. I remember.
Sir. Yes, sir. As you know, or may not remember, I'm a 4-tour combat veteran from Afghanistan, returned home to a new home in Marin County after those 4 tours in 2010. I started volunteering in the Veterans Service Office for a gentleman who at that time was 92 years old. His name was Mort Talon. I volunteered with him for 8 months, and then I was offered the job after he decided it was time to retire. During that time period, I was given the opportunity to go to San Quentin as a volunteer and meet with veterans just like myself, in the sense that they were suffering from issues related to their time in the service. Once I was given the job as Veteran Service Officer, I decided to keep that relationship with San Quentin and visited there on a regular basis, helping those veterans to understand the benefits that they're entitled to. Senator Roth, to answer to your question as far as the VA medical services, every veteran that I came in contact with, I did an application called 1010EZ, which is the application for VA health care. And I did that with the intent that if that veteran was to be released prior to me catching them out the gate, maybe they left while the 2 weeks between the time I was there last, however it happened, I made sure that their information was in the VA healthcare system so that no matter where they went, they were able to get into a healthcare facility immediately. Now, I did bring 2 veterans with me today. This gentleman here, Ted Wilson, is a lifer, 30 years at San Quentin, 3 strike offense, Vietnam veteran, 2 Purple Hearts. However, the problem is that he had a dishonorable discharge. And the thing is that he wouldn't have been caught by the VSRR or the Veterans Records Program where they react with DOD and stuff like that. He wouldn't have gotten that opportunity to do the paperwork and so forth. As a matter of fact, he had tried prior to going in. He wasn't eligible for health care. He wasn't eligible for psych services at that time when he first got home from Vietnam. We got him started in doing the paperwork when 2012. Once we discovered each other and started that paperwork. As of about 3 weeks ago, for VA purposes, his discharge was overturned. He's now eligible for full VA health care, and his claim for issues related to the shrapnel still in his back and wounds on his arms, he is now eligible for services as well as benefits. He will be a success story. He is a success story. He's out. He's been out for 3 years. The other gentleman, Dan is was at CTF, and he's here to tell his story. 22 years, joined the military in 1987, and didn't access benefits. Not uncommon for that time period, because it wasn't the big military push to say, hey, you have benefits at the VA. But the thing is, sir, is that the VA medical, VA benefits, those are what have helped me to do the life I do, as well as these gentlemen being forced to remind me that, you know what, if I decide to make that left turn, this is where I'll be in San Quentin. And let me tell you, those things happen. That car that cuts you off, that you go into mode that is not, unfortunately, not normal civilian life, to decide, I'm going to get out of my car. But no, I'm not going to get out of my car, because I know what it can do. I know where that goes and where that leads. And one last thing, and then I'll let these gentlemen take the floor. To Justice Ellen Moore, one of the things that I'm doing is, for instance, on May 25th, I'll be speaking to the Marin Bar Association and talking to them about Mill 100. The form Mill 100 is a great form, and it should be implemented in the justice system and should be made mandatory for the veterans to use in the courts, because of the fact that it does identify them as veterans. And a lot of veterans don't think that they're entitled to benefits because they're not missing an arm or a leg. They weren't shot. They didn't see combat. But the fact of the matter is, these veterans raised the right hand, and they said that they will do whatever the military asks. And sometimes they don't get asked to do much. Maybe it might be just to do admin work. But then there are those veterans who get asked to deploy to combat zones and to do admin work. So the fact of the matter is, if you raise your right hand, you're a veteran, and you are entitled to benefits one way or another, either through the VA or through private organizations. Thank you.
Okay, the gentleman in the hat cap, just your first name if you'd prefer, or your whole name if you like, sir.
Thank you, Senators. My name is Ted Wilson, and I'll be kind of brief with my story. I joined the military when I was 16, and I ended up in Vietnam at the age of 17. I did 13 months. I saw a lot of action. I got wounded twice. And when they tried to send me back, that's when me and the military had a problem. The 30 years that I did in prison was off and on after I came back from Vietnam. Nobody knew about PTSD, and nobody knew about issues that we had brought back to the United States. We couldn't talk to anyone because we were labeled as crazy Vietnam vets. So we carried that inside of us for myself 50 years. During that time, I self-medicated to help me sleep sometime at night, to help me ease the nightmares away. That's how I started going to prison. And I went in and out because I was trying to get money to accumulate drugs to help myself medicate. Once I got to San Quentin, I had never heard of a veteran service officer. A lot of veterans that went to Vietnam didn't want anything to do with the VA because they hated the VA, because the VA did nothing when we first came back. So a lot of them don't say they're veterans because they don't want to deal with the VA. I went to San Quentin and I joined this group called Veterans Healing Veterans. And I met people who were sincerely concerned about my condition. And they began to help me. I listened to these people up here. The answers don't come out of a book. You can't take a set of rules and say, okay, we're going to implement this and make it work. It's the person that you deal with that makes it work. I met Sean Stevens. I had never heard of a veteran service officer, but he took an interest in my case, and he took an interest in me, and he showed me compassion. I met Mary Donovan. I met EO. These people showed compassion. they volunteered their services to come into a prison like San Quentin and help veterans. So that got me to thinking. So I've been out 3 years. I volunteer a lot to pay back. I volunteer at colleges. I've spoken at different organizations, and I've been interviewed by a few newspapers. My answer is what they need is more people with compassion to help these veteran service officers inside the prison. Because like I say, a vet won't come forward because he don't trust the VA. You know. And thank you.
Sir, please.
Thank you for this opportunity, Senator. My name is Dan Scott, and I was a term-to-life prisoner, and I was paroled after 22 years of continuous incarceration, and I was blessed at around 2007 into my incarceration to be involved in a veteran support group within Salinas Valley State Prison. That is where I was starting to experience the camaraderie and the fellowship that fellow veterans support in one another and in themselves. Prior to that, I was not aligned or finding any kind of veteran group in my prison history. From there, about a year into that, an outreach was being done, and so we had, from the Veteran Transition Center in Monterey, a very compassionate man come in, and he did a workshop, and he asked for incarcerated veterans to write letters to currently returning combat veterans and try to reach out to them from a perspective of being willing to ask for help and to try to do something before maybe something catastrophic happens in their lives and they might be in the shoes that I was in. So I started to write these letters of my experience and strength and hope and started to send those out to this gentleman through the Veteran Transition Center. So a relationship started to build with me and that organization. Fast forward some time, I go through several parole hearings. It was instrumental in my parole hearing process that the commissioners acknowledged that I was going to be going to the VTC, that I was fortunate enough to utilize the services that Lieutenant De La Rosa talked about, and those guys there had gotten me enrolled in the Veteran Medical Health Care Program. So I was able to get enrolled and integrated into a lot of the VA services that I never knew nothing about while I was going through my parole hearing processes. And that gave me a sense of comfort and calm, knowing that I was going to be not such a burden on community resources, and that it restored a sense of dignity that I had something that I had earned and that was going to be available to me. And at my fourth hearing, I was granted suitability, and after 163 days, I was freed. The Veteran Transition Center was at the gate to pick me up, and I went to a program. Since that time, I've been able to become very involved in the veteran mental health program, peer support program, the medical program itself, and just really get all the wraparound services that were available, because in the Fort Ord area right there, there's a new clinic being built, there's another clinic, there's a shuttle program to get me to Palo Alto. I received a TBI when I was in service, and that time it wasn't acknowledged. I was ran over, my head was smashed. We're looking into that in a polytrauma kind of a medical field that's new, that's evolved. And so I'm just very grateful to be able to get these services. And the neat thing is I've been able to align myself and give back. And so I've heard about the Veteran Treatment Court, and Thursday I'll be sitting in the Monterey County Courthouse with the guy that I'm a mentor to, because I'm a mentor in the Veteran Treatment Court within Monterey County. And I'm able to use my experience, all the years of growing and healing, to try to help guide this young man while he's in some troubled waters right now, and hopefully navigate with him while he can get himself corrected. And so it's just a real pleasure to be here today, and I appreciate you letting me share a little bit of my story.
Well, I praise and congratulate you, sir. You definitely demonstrated your suitability to the parole board. Further, you've demonstrated amends. You understand what that is, and you continue to make amends and contributions to society. And I appreciate that very much.
Thank you, Senator Nelson.
Senator Roth, any questions of this panel?
Well, just a comment and a question. Well, first, gentlemen, thank you for your military service. Justice, thank you for yours in Vietnam and beyond. I just have a question about the Judicial Council form that you indicated was optional. Did the Judicial Council indicate a reason at the time that that decision was made as to why the form would be optional as opposed to mandatory?
It's my understanding that a few people wrote in and said, this is an invasion of people's privacy if you force them to reveal that they have been a veteran, because some people, for the reasons that these Vietnam vets, or these vets just stated, that some people just want to keep it to themselves that they are a veteran. But it does appear from everything we've heard today that it's very important for a system to know who our veterans are and when they are in the courts.
Well,
but we tried to get it to be a mandatory form, and we were unsuccessful.
it's one thing to keep that to oneself, but once you enter the court system, lots of things that are not private or that are private no longer become private. Has there been an attempt to revisit that issue at the Judicial Council level since that point in time?
No, Senator, there has not been. But, Senator, may I say one thing to you?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
I was so glad to hear all the questions you were asking about the VA, and after hearing from these two gentlemen, something has to come between prison and being out in the real world, and I think we just heard some descriptions of that. I remember one fellow, when he went into prison, we didn't have the stoplights that held up the red hand. And there he was so concerned for all these years to follow all the prison rules and regulations, and he got in the middle of the street and the red hand went up and he absolutely panicked. He didn't know, should I stop? Should I go? Should I go back? Because they don't want to violate any rules. And I was really happy to hear all those questions you were asking.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Please, you have something more to offer?
I'd like to say one thing, Senator. It took me 50 years to have a person say, thank you for your services and welcome home, vet. And that made me feel good.
Well, you're appreciated here, sir. You're appreciated for that service, but you're also appreciated for what you've done. You made some mistakes in life, but you've corrected those ways. You've given back. And you've given back multifold because you're giving back to others, helping mentor them on the path that they won't get down that sorry track. Yes, sir. That's a gift, sir.
Thank you.
It truly is. Justice Moore, we're very honored to have you here. Do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make to Senator Roth and I before we start to? We want to bring the secretaries up again and then have public comment. Anything you'd like to add?
I just want to thank you very much. I have, in one of the envelopes, and I gave it to Mr. Teasdale before, but I want to point out that I do pay attention to all these statutes that you've come out with, and this article came out, it's written by me in California litigation, and an attempt to try to get some education out to the state bar about everything you've been doing, and I really meant it when I said I'm thrilled that you're interested in doing more for veterans, and I'm available to you for any assistance that you might need.
We welcome that relationship. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Secretary Kernan and Secretary Imboski, if you could come forward again. Gentlemen, you began this, and it's entirely appropriate that you'd help us finish it off. I think it's been very instructive and heartwarming. At least I believe I speak for myself and Senator Roth. How do you gentlemen feel about it? Secretary Kernan, any observations to sum it up for us?
Well, I tell you, I'm so proud of my staff that come up here. You know the staff, their heart is into it. And the Justice and I have talked about things we could do. I don't believe that the department's doing enough yet, but I think with my partner, we learned a lot today about how we might be able to improve the system, how we look at how we can identify people and get them services, and I really appreciate you guys taking your time and shining a light on this important subject, so thank you very much.
Well, Secretary Kernan, your folks showed so much initiative on their own, and you know, that's gratifying, and it certainly instills in me a commitment to try to do a little bit more from where we sit here, if we can. And Secretary Bastiani, same with you folks. Your team, obviously, they're out there stepping up to the plate and doing the very best they can. And your veteran service officers, you know, I intimately know the challenges that they face and the limited resources they contend with. And I've been out and seen their offices and been with them. And we've heard some things here today that are very encouraging, too. How would you like to sum it up with us?
Thank you, Senator. You did say the word, would you like to us too, would you like to finish up here? This is, as you said before, this is a start, not a finish.
It is.
And but what a beautiful road that seems to be opening in front of us. Many people probably think of justice as a very harsh subject, but boy, what we heard this afternoon, I'm so glad we sat through this, is a lot of compassion and goodwill and charity to fellow man. We're going to capitalize on that. I think that these two departments that we represent can work together, maybe in ways that we haven't worked before. And I think we see how we can do that. Maybe better catchment at entry, getting more information. We can communicate maybe better with our CVSOs. And I'm wondering if the model, I'm not promulgating it, but I'm wondering if the model of the treatment court, which now exists in only 24 of our counties, might look more attractive to other parts of the state.
Oh, I think most assuredly it does. And that's part of our mission from our small pulpit here, is to showcase the success of those courts. And I can do it with a passion, because I've seen it at the local level in Butte County. We see it at maybe even a larger scale level here. And that gives us that more bully pulpit. And indeed, we are talking about justice, but we're also talking about giving people's second chances and other opportunities in life, and doing what is justice to our veterans. And that's a noble mission for all of us. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have the opportunity for some public comment. Are any members of the audience there that would like to come forward and offer some public comment before we close? Our Hall of Famer, Mr. Conady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No hearing would be complete without me making public comment. And I'm not wearing my Purple Heart today because I gave it to Ted Wilson, because he earned 2 of them in Vietnam. But I really have to commend both of you, senators, and Wade and Gary, because this is a subject long overdue. And we've made a lot of steps towards helping veterans in prison. And I want to separate that out from Veterans Treatment Court, because we're talking about veterans that are already in prison. There is issues we can deal with on Veterans Treatment Courts. But out of this hearing, I think should come that I would recommend that CDCR and CalVet, with their stakeholders, form a working group to address the issues that can be handled and discussed today by administrative action that doesn't require any legislation. For example, data collection. You get all the stakeholders involved, we can do a better job on data collection. I would also recommend that CDCR have trained veterans service officers on their staff in the prison, because the amount of money we would save the state of California on its correctional system if we can help veterans get benefits and turn their lives around and get out of prison. I got a comment on Eric DeRosa and his lifer friend Ed Muniz, who started the program in Soledad 2009, whenever, and I've been in touch with them. I knew Ed before he went to prison, and I would recommend that this committee have a hearing down in Soledad, and that Soledad be looked at as a model for the entire state. And now I'm going to tell you about my dream. My dream would be for a rehearing on all combat Vietnam veterans who are still in prison, who were sentenced for their crimes before we knew about PTSD, before we knew about the effects of the Vietnam War on them. I think there are a lot of people like Ted Wilson who are still in prison who could turn their lives around if given a chance. But again, thank you so much for having this hearing. Thank you, sir.
Well, Mr. Connerty, I can reflect on something that I was a part of as a senator my first time around, and then later worked with as chairman of the Board of Prison Terms with Senator Speer and Kuehl. And it was what was called battered women syndrome. And they were wanting to do something in the area. And as chairman of the board of prison terms, you couldn't let BWS be a means of exoneration of the commission of a crime. But I worked with them on that legislation, which generally put, we wrote it such that it would be taken and weighted as a factor in mitigation, in consideration, and which would result in the opportunity for an earlier release, if you will. A consideration of those circumstances that caused them to do that. That BWS, it was pioneering legislation. They were the authors of it. I was not. I was coming at it from the tough Board of Prison Terms chairman guy, all about justice for crimes done. But I saw merit in weighing these extenuating or mitigating circumstances. There may be some fruit in thoughts related here to post-traumatic stress disorder too. I don't know that. That's just a thought off the top of my head here today. Certainly the young gentleman here who testified and was found suitable by the board, and that's not a generous board even today. I have no doubt that they took into account the insight that he had in the rehabilitation and the introspection that he had gained. And that's all food for thought as we proceed. Pete. Ladies and gentlemen, oh, one more, I'm sorry. Please, sir. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for holding the hearing today and inviting us to be here today. I'm Terry Bear I'm humble and proud to be the the director of the Veterans Transition Center of Monterey County, which has been mentioned here a couple times. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing for our veterans. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your service, sir, as well. As an Air Force retiree, I appreciate your Air Force career there also. But, I came up here, I was going to try to give a humble or an inspirational story and tell you about what we're doing here, but I think Dan beat me to that, so I'm not going to say any more. But I do want to acknowledge Ted and Dan, and I think if there's any doubt as to why we do this and to the efforts and the lengths we go to, I think there should be none, because they represent the spirit of our veterans and the need to assist them to the extent that we possibly can. So thank you for your service. Just real quickly, we represent as a nonprofit. We do a lot of work inside the prison while the veterans are incarcerated. But I think what we offer that needs support is that our program provides a landing spot, a landing opportunity for these veterans once they come out of an incarcerated status. And we do a lot of outreach, and we work in the prison, and we work with the parole board. And I think, if I may be so brazen to say so, I think that the fact that a veteran has the opportunity to come out and land in the Veterans Transition Center upon release has a lot of pull with the parole board, and they tend to approve that veteran's release if they know they're coming to a good program like the Veterans Transition Center. And so we get them there, and we take care of them in transitional housing. They're surrounded by veterans and other incarcerated veterans too who have been released. Full case management and full wraparound services. And you mentioned that what's the accountability as far as getting each one of these vets in the VA healthcare system and the VA benefit system. 100% of the veterans who come to us, that's the very first thing we do is get them in that program, sir. So I want to allay your fears there. We make sure that happens. And then we try to get them into permanent housing, get them jobs, get them education, get them a permanent income, a steady income, and get them into permanent housing. And I'm here to say that in some cases, some of these veterans in our program, I want you to know about this because it's important, they go from an incarcerated status, and within 6 months, we have them through our program and out into permanent housing, and they've got full medical care and treatment. They're in the benefit system. They've got a job. They've got income. They've got a HUD-VASH voucher. They get SSVF support, and they're out on their own and standing on their own 2 feet in self-sufficient status, and that's fantastic. So I'm proud to be able to say we're part of that, but it takes a great amount of collaboration and outreach to get to that point. But I also need to note that we do a lot of these services just out of HUD. We get funding from the VA and from HUD. We've recently lost some HUD funding that contributed to our outreach and our staffing. But we're going to continue to do this because it's important. But we're doing this out of HUD. We don't have any funding for that. So I would like to urge and ask for any sort of financial assistance in finding case managers to do outreach and to help us to keep doing what we're doing in support of these veterans. And I thank you for that consideration, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Roth, any closing remarks?
No, Mr. Chair, just thank you it was a privilege to participate in this hearing, and I appreciate your support.
Meeting adjourned.